Okay, so we're going to talk about something a little bit different today. Become a CLI ninja. My name is Dave Carroll, and I'm the product manager for the CLI. I used to be the person who ran developer evangelism for Salesforce, and so I've recently changed, and I'm excited to talk about the CLI. So a ninja, what's a ninja? Anybody got a definition of a ninja? Right, I didn't write this title, but I did write the content, and so I thought about ninja. I'm like, who's a ninja? A ninja is somebody who is pretty expert, maybe nimble, agile, can take a sword and slice a floating piece of paper up, basically do whatever they want. And so I decided that as far as becoming a ninja in this session, we're going to talk about taking over control of the CLI via plugins and how to write a plugin. So the best place to start with that is our forward-looking statement. We are in beta with our CLI, so this is absolutely applicable to everything that we talk about with regards to the CLI. And the short of it is, despite what I might say, please make your stock purchases, investments, and product purchases based on generally available features. All right. Okay, so before I start talking about customizing the CLI, I want to explain a little bit about the architecture of the CLI. And basically, the CLI is founded on what we call the CLI engine. And so this CLI engine really does very little except for parsing what's entered in the command line and then taking and handing that off to a plugin. In addition to the command that's entered on the command line, there's some other things that are passed to the plugins, and that's in the plugin management interface. So the plugin management interface will pass something called a context, and that context might have the ability to access configuration information. So if you have aliases set up for your orgs, or if you have other configuration settings, we can read those and take appropriate actions based on the configuration that you've got. Logging service. So there's a lot of logging that goes on. There's logging of responses. There's logging of error messages. There's logging to the actual log files so that you can maybe later on debug what's going on with your plugin. The flags and arguments I mentioned, and auth and transport. So we don't want anybody to be rewriting authorization. We've already done that for you in a very interesting and I think smooth way. And also transport. So when you're interacting with our APIs, our endpoints, we want to provide that as a very simple experience. Now, sounds great, right? So here's the thing. This is all forward-looking statements, right? So today, as we go from beta to GA, this is the architecture that we're looking at to provide for you in developing plugins. Now, that doesn't mean you can't develop plugins today. It just means that a lot of these services will be introduced as we approach the next release. There are lots of interesting things you can do with plugins today. So one of the things that you can do with plugins today is the Lightning CLI plugin. So the Lightning CLI plugin provides testing services, Selenium linting services for your Lightning components to make sure that you're in compliance with Locker service and so on. Also, the DX tool belt, which we kind of refer to as the CLI that you've seen demos of today, that's actually a plugin into the engine. And the plugins that you write will have the same kind of pure positioning as the DX plugin. Also, language services is a plugin, and this is what provides some of our IDEs and our tooling vendors with the autocomplete and other syntactical grammar things around Salesforce. So what kind of things might you want to do as a plugin? You might be asking yourself, why would I want to write a plugin? We just saw earlier today, a demonstration, I think it was in the App Exchange App Jam or something like that, Demo Jam. A company called Odisava wrote a plugin to the CLI to implement their data movement APIs. Well, you know, they could have written their own CLI, but instead they wrote a plugin for it. Another great plugin might be, you know, you've seen that we have these push and pull capabilities, these deploy capabilities, test runs. Maybe at the end of a test run, I want to easily post a chatter, success or failure of what happened with that CI job. So you can write a plugin to do that. Not have to worry about auth, getting the right org, or anything like that. So those are a couple of examples. If we're going to talk about writing plugins, it all boils down to the command structure. And so commands are pretty easy, but I've gone ahead and outlined it for you here, where you have the executable. Again, that's the CLI engine. In our case, you execute that with SFDX. And then next is what we call the namespace. And this namespace allows us to be able to separate different topics for different uses. So for instance, if I have a namespace, or if I have a topic that I want to call org, and a command in it that does list, and maybe it does it slightly differently than we've given you in the CLI, I need a namespace to distinguish that from the force org list, for instance. And then a topic is a grouping. So inside the org topic in the force CLI, we've got org create, org list, different commands that are within that topic. And so the topic basically helps you organize your commands in logical ways. And then finally, we have the commands. Of course, we can have more than one command. We can also have a subtopic, perfectly legit, so topic, subtopic command, and then flags and arguments. Any questions? Didn't think so. Good. Okay. So how do we actually define the plugin itself? So a plugin is a discrete kind of piece of code written in Node.js, by the way. We define the plugin using these three items, right? We export a namespace, we export a topic, or an array of topics, and we export the array of commands. This is all that the CLI engine needs to know about to be able to execute the commands that you write in your plugin. So when we're writing a plugin, we need a project. And what you see in front of you is a proposed project structure that I've borrowed heavily from the way that we've implemented the DX Toolbelt plugin ourselves. And basically what we want to do in this project structure is take and create a commands folder that's going to hold all the command definitions. So the previous slide was a plugin definition. These are command definitions. And so within the command definitions, I'm going to organize my commands under folders that correspond to the topic. And so this is purely a convention. There's nothing enforceable about this, but it is a nice way to organize and easily navigate your project. Next is the topic definition. And again, you can see my convention here. If my topic is say, then my topic definition is say.js. And that just defines pretty much the help for the topic. And then finally, below that is the command definition itself. So in this case, can anybody guess what my command is? Topic colon command. Anybody, shout it out. Right, hello colon say would be the command. So, or say hello. So say colon say hello would be that command. And so I've created a JavaScript file that has a topic, underscore, and the name of the command. So I'll never get lost or wonder where my commands are defined. Next comes our lib folder. And in the lib folder is where we'll do the implementation part of our commands. And so we arrange it in a very similar way where we create a folder for the topic. And within that topic folder, we have our command API. And I've called this the say API.js. And in here is where I actually implement the code that the command executes. There's another JavaScript file in here called messages, and this isn't essential. I mean, you can leave this out and use a different approach. I like this approach because what messages is a JavaScript file that defines all the message strings that your plugin is going to output. And the reason why this is important is because if we do it this way, then we can easily localize it for other languages simply by putting the commands in separate sub-bundles of the, or sub-locales of the message folder file. Okay, so this is kind of a recap. We provide a folder for the implementation. We only need a couple of things for the topic definition. That's the name and the help. And then the command, in addition to topic and help, it also needs the name. The command implementation, it's a folder. Again, the folder is topical. You might have multiple implementation files. That's fine. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and create a plugin. I'm going to show you a lot of these files in a minute, so don't worry. We'll see more of that. And to do that, I'm going to make this more readable. Okay, is that better? In the back? It's okay, good. Okay, right. So I've created a couple of plugins myself, as you might imagine, in trying to figure out what a good approach is to defining both the plugin interface and the project that we're going to create. And so one of the things I decided made sense was to create a plugin project generation plugin that runs in the CLI. Right, so let's just take a look at that. My namespace is DJC. So I can do a help. And this help, you can see that I've got two topics in there. We're concerned with the plugin one. And so you can see that within that topic, I've got a command called create. And by the way, I do -H between almost every command that I execute when I'm working with the CLI, so don't feel bad if you find yourself doing that as well. There's a lot of things to remember flag-wise. Okay, so create -H tells me all the flags that I need to use to properly create a plugin project. So let's go ahead and try it out. We're going to make the command name echo. And then next is my namespace, so I want this to be in my DJC namespace. Next is the plugin name. I'll call it demo. And finally is the topic. I'm going to call that demo. So I've essentially kind of given my plugin generator all the information that it needs to set up that directory, that project directory, and create a skeleton plugin for me. So I'll go ahead and create that, and we can see the output is shows me a nice tree of the structure that was created. At this point, let's go ahead and pop into a code window and take a look. So VS Code is really pretty good for developing plugins, and I'll explain more about that why, or more about why. I forgot to change directories, sorry. So I created a demo directory. All right, pop that open in code. Okay, so here we can see I've got my commands folder, I've got my lib folder, and some other things that I'm going to talk about. So let's go look at the topic definition. Again, it's super simple. It's got the name and a couple of descriptions that are used by the help system within the CLI engine. For the command definition, it gets a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So this fully defines my command to the engine so that the engine has enough information on being able to execute it and some configuration elements. So I include the command itself and then the topic, some description stuff and help messages. And you can see I'm using my messages JS that we'll look at in a minute. And then whether or not my command requires a workspace. So some commands are dependent on being executed in a project workspace for DX, and some don't require that. It's useful to know. And then I've defined a flag called hello text. The flag is -t. I've got a description that probably should have come from my messages.js, but this shows you that you don't actually need that. You can just provide strings. I can tell whether it has a value or not. If that was false, that means that's more of a Boolean flag. So if it exists, then true. If it doesn't, then false. And then whether or not the flag is required. And then the last thing that's defined in this is a run command. So every definition will have a run command. The CLI engine loads this thing up and tries to execute run. If it can find run, then it's happy. If it can't, then it'll error. And it's also passing in this thing called context that I mentioned briefly before. The context, again, gives you more information about the things that you need to run your commands. OK, so let's take a look at the messages real quick. So this is what makes the messages really nice. They're organized as a default or based on topic names, command names, and then you have locales embedded within each one of those. And so that allows you to localize your plugin text to whatever language that you want. So let's look at the implementation. So the implementation is super simple. I've created a class that corresponds to my topic. And within this class, I will create methods that correspond to the commands. And so it's very easy to instantiate the class. Knowing the command, I can call that command by executing that method. And again, I'm passing that context around. In this case, we're just going to log to the console. And I'm going to output whatever was passed into the command. There's also some other helper classes down here that you don't really have to implement if you don't want to. This is part of the forward-looking statements that I'm working out what the right pattern is. And I really anticipate getting some good feedback from the community as we move through this process. OK, let's see, what else did I miss? So index.js, we saw that. What's also generated is a useful debug.js. So debugging commands from the CLI can be very difficult as a command kind of spawns a process, executes, and then leaves. So it's really hard to attach. It's not a long-running process or anything like that. And so this will help with that. And then associated with that is just a simple script to invoke the debug.js. Inspect-break is new in the latest version of Node, so it's kind of a experimental feature, but it makes it super simple to attach a debugger to this process. OK, so what's the next thing we need to do? So we've created our command. The next thing we need to do is install it into the CLI. So let's just take a look at what I've got installed so far. So I have several things installed in here. And you'll notice that they all say symlinked, right? So typically what you do is you install your commands from an NPM repository. When it says symlinked, that means it's running from your local version of that command. And the way that you make that happen is do sfdx plugins link. It's just that easy. So now it's linked in there. If I take a look at my list of plugins, I've got demo. Now we can kind of do some interesting things like sfdx DJC, that was my namespace, -H. And so my demo topic shows up, right? So everything looks like it's working properly. If I get the help on demo, I can see that there's my command. See if my command has any information to give me. Yep, so there's my hello text flag, right? So this is actually the result of this project scaffolding is a fully functional, albeit useless, plugin. So let's go ahead and run the plugin. So we're going to do -T and maybe put in something like, I don't know, Trailhead DX is rockin'. What did I do there? This happened to me before. I don't think I can use that. Double quotes have a special meaning in Bash, which they don't in JavaScript. And so there we can see the output is exactly what we expected. The data that I put into it, and according to my implementation, also this small string here. Pretty cool, right? So now I've got it running. Now I can implement my command. You can see where I'm using the context. Within that are my flags that I can access using dot notation. You know, everything's good to go. So let's just go back over to this guy. So we've created a plugin. Pretty straightforward, I think. Now the question is, let's get to debugging. So when I first started working on this, I was lucky to have an engineer who works on DX, on Salesforce DX, who I could ask, how do I get a debugger started to take a look at what's going on with the tool belt? And so he gave me some good hints, and I've implemented them for you in this plugin so that it's always available and ready for you. So first off, we've got our debug.sh. This is an executable script file that basically collects all the stuff that we enter on the screen. Where did my mouse go? Hello. There. Collects all the stuff that we entered on the screen, word by word, and then sticks it into a command separated by spaces, and then basically just passes that to that debug.js file down on the bottom. So the debug.js file then has a couple of pieces to it. One is a command parser. So the command parser basically is taking the place of our CLI engine, which typically does our command parsing for us and passes us the parsed command. And so we have to simulate that, and we do that with the command parser. And finally, root, that's the index.js. That's the plugin definition file that we saw earlier. And finally, we just run the command, passing it a simple structure with the command and the flags. So what I'm going to do is not do these two slides. Instead, I'm going to skip straight ahead to launch JSON. I'm going to talk about what was on those slides as we do some actual debugging. So launch.json, this is a file specific to Visual Studio Code that defines how to launch the debugger, what it should do upon launch, where to look for something to attach to, and so on. Super simple. This is like boilerplate, right? There's nothing specific to my plugin in here. And so let's go ahead and try some debugging then. The first thing that I need to do, oh, by the way, I can do this entirely in Visual Studio Code. So I'll show the debug console, which also happens to have a terminal. And you'll notice that it's also inherited my Bash settings from my standard terminal, which is kind of nice. I don't lose anything there. And so the first thing that I want to do is, because I don't know that much about file systems, I generated that debug.sh without executable permissions. So we need to add that. So we'll just add that real quick. And then we executed a command back over here. I'm just going to copy this command. and then bring it back over into Visual Studio Code. And before executing this command, what I want to do is replace SFDX, because I don't want to launch the engine in this case. Instead, I want to launch that debug.sh. So I'll stick that in there. You see that all right? I don't think I can make that much bigger. I'll try. There we go. OK, so once I click that, you'll notice that on the screen it tells me that it's listening on port 9229, which if we went and looked at our launch.json is what we are going to connect to. And so at this point, all I need to do is go ahead and launch a debug session. And now I'm at my debug.js page at a breakpoint, right? So now I can begin stepping through. Let's step through a little bit because there's a couple of things I want to show you. So one is the index.js file. It's one thing to go ahead and look at the code in the page, but this is how it renders out when it's executed. So you can see I've got my list of commands. There's my command. It's been parsed properly. Everything belongs on it is there. My topics and my namespace are parsed out. So in addition to having that command, I can go ahead and process this farther by taking the args that were passed into this from the script. And now I can see the flags that were passed in here. I've got the trailhead DX hello text. I've got my echo and so on. Now before I go ahead and run this any farther, because all it's going to do is execute my command, I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint over here. And so this is, again, in my implementation file. And what I want to do now is just tell it to run on through. And boom, I'm stopped at my breakpoint. I can do all the debugging that I want. For instance, maybe I want to see what was passed in my context. Really simple structure here. It's my flags and the flag trailhead DX, or the hello text. Right, so if I just let that run, it will run through. I do have a slight problem running this in the debugger in that it didn't write out the whole sentence, but rest assured it actually does it in the terminal. So again, I can run this in the terminal. And this time I'll do SFDX. Oops. SFDX. OK, so it prints it out. OK, so now maybe I want to make a change to this file. How does that process work? So let's go ahead and add another console line to this. And this time what I'm going to do is do messages, get message. I'm going to get it from my demo topic, no arguments, and this is going to be my demo echo bundle. OK, so right now, sorry, this is going to be help me. OK, so right now that doesn't exist in messages. We'll take a look at messages, and this is the demo echo, but there's no help me, so let's put in help me. And this is for Chris Wall. Boom. All right. Then I'm just going to double check to make sure I got the case right on that. Help me. Yep. Good thing I checked. Oops. That's a small h. OK, so now if I want to see if my change took effect, I can go ahead and let's bring this up to the top. I can go ahead and run the command again. First thing you'll notice is it says parsing demo at the top. So the CLI, when you link this way, it knows that you've changed something in the file system. There's a watcher there, and it says, OK, I'm going to reparse that plugin. And then you can see that Certainly, my change made it in place by using a message this time, which is probably a better practice. And there we go. So pretty good? Yeah? Little reaction from the crowd? Okay. All right. Speakers love some kind of reaction. Okay, here we are. So that's the debugging part. Now, once you've finished building your plugin and you want to maybe distribute it to your team or you want to make it public, you can certainly do that. And it's just as simple as publishing any other NPM package. And the way you publish an NPM package is you go into your project where your node project is, and you type in npm publish, and it will publish your package. It will use the package.json to figure out all the metadata around that npm publication, and then just push it up to npm. Once it's up there, anybody using the Salesforce CLI can now do SFDX, plugins, install, and then the name of your npm package. If you have scopes or versions on your npm package, you can take advantage of those. You just have to specify those when you specify what plugin to install. Right, so by God, I'm out of time. I got 1 minute left. So looking forward, plugin development is available today. So you can go and do this. There's great documentation up on Heroku. Because we've adopted their model, you can use that documentation. It's not quite as rich. It doesn't give you all the candy and sugar that the plugin generation does, but you can certainly do it. The interface for the plugins, that plugin management interface, and the services supplied by the engine are still in flux. And so those are going to be changing over time. My goal is to get this completely settled and stable for the Dreamforce timeframe, which would be when the CLI goes GA. There's no specific Salesforce documentation around this, and so that's part of the process of defining those services and documenting them. We don't have namespace validation and protection yet. That's something that's important to us that we're going to be working on. And as I mentioned, we're targeting GA. So join the Salesforce DX open beta. I think I'm 2 minutes over. That's what I see. Oh, OK. Get a trial org. I think you guys have seen these slides before. Here's a bunch of sessions to go to. These are all after this session. So pick one and go for it. Don't forget to get your Trailblazer badges. We've got these 4 new DX-related trails. And with that, I want to say thank you very much. You guys have been amazing. Go build plugins. Become a ninja.